Well, I'm really happy to be here today. Consensus is the 10th anniversary. I'd love to hear more about the company, what you guys are working on, what you're working towards. So, floor is yours.
So Akash, my name is Greg Osuri. I'm the CEO for Overclock Labs, the core contributor for Akash Network. And Akash is the world's first supercloud. So what a supercloud is essentially a cloud that connects any cloud-grade compute, be it in a data center, be it in a home, be it in a private setting or a public setting, and brings together in a way that's easily consumable by developers around the world. And the best the advantage of doing so is obviously cost, right? So Akash costs apples to apples compared to Amazon about 1/10 what you would pay because the supply comes from underutilized resources. And more importantly, access, right? So Akash is able to, in fact, Akash is the only network, be it decentralized or centralized, that can offer on-demand H100s at a very reasonable price. H100s are one of the most advanced GPUs made by NVIDIA, and GPUs are these specialized accelerated chips that are critical for doing anything machine learning and AI. And the reason why Akash is able to do so is because Akash, being open source and permissionless and decentralized, can go places where typical closed networks cannot, right? For example, machine learning companies that have purchased enormous chips in the last cycle, that have used them for training and maybe upgraded the chipset to something newer, sitting on this like fleet of H100s or A100s that are relatively very good, but not used because they need specialized chips. There are hundreds of these companies that are just sitting on idle capacity. Yeah. While there's enormous demand for AI, chips, you can see NVIDIA members obviously speaking volumes, and also seeing folks like Elon Musk complaining about how it is easier to get drugs than NVIDIA chips, right? So there's obvious crazy demand for these chips, but there's also just supply, and it turns out the only problem is really coordination. And blockchains are phenomenal coordination networks. In doing so, we created the world's first open source cloud.
So tell me a little bit more about that. It's fascinating, the whole picture. Is it a tokenized model? Is it a decentralized model? How does this whole come together?
So we did not begin as a decentralized network. In fact, we began in 2015.
Wow.
Right after Kubernetes, which is a very popular cloud orchestration infrastructure framework, launched. And Akash, in fact, the company behind Akash, Overclock Labs, was created to take Kubernetes to market to enable edge computing, high performance computing. Then we ran into this critical problem of edge coordination, because at scale, coordination becomes extremely challenging.
Yeah.
Permission coordination. Yeah. So we used a blockchain to solve that coordination problem in 2016 timeframes, way before tokens were a thing. And there are tokens, but they were not really a primary being. In fact, we started off with proof of work, but proof of work has its own limitations because of energy needs and scalability issues. So switching to proof of work kind of made a token a requirement, because token is what gives security for a proof of stake network. And also realizing token gives another added benefit for open source software, which is sustainability. As you know, today, our backgrounds are in deep Kubernetes and Docker. In fact, some of the libraries we wrote for Akash originally are used by NVIDIA, IBM, Kubernetes, and Docker. You can actually see our GitHubs, and you'll see the folks using it. It's funny because our code is used by NVIDIA, and we in turn use NVIDIA source code, right? So open source is about building on each other's foundations, and that's what Akash is, right? So the foundation of Akash goes way back. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, just down that path a little bit further, and if it comes to you, which blockchain are you on? Are you your own blockchain? Are you working through Ethereum? Are you working through another Polkadot, something else?
Right, so we began with Ethereum with proof of stake, right? So we added a token to switch to proof of stake on our own layer one.
Okay.
So we started out with Tendermint, which is basically became Cosmos.
Yep.
And so Akash is the first Cosmos chain. It does not run on Cosmos, but it runs as an independent layer one, but it's interoperable with other Cosmos chains. In fact, Akash is the first interoperable blockchain besides Cosmos Hub. First IBC transaction happened between Cosmos and Akash. So the token came and added this sustainability properties for open source software, right? As you know, today in in Kubernetes. So we have a contributor churn problem.
Okay.
So open source is great, because you have contributors all over the world that contribute based on their free time, based on interest, right? At some point, it becomes unsustainable for a company to run. That's why it's very, very rare to see pure open source companies succeed. An example would be Docker.
Yes.
Phenomenal software, phenomenally popular software, but couldn't survive as a company, right? So there's a sustenance problem in open source. Akash has figured that out. So Akash has been around, the company for Akash has been around for about 10 years now, almost. And Akash has been around for 5 years. There are about 500 contributors to the Akash network. Akash is fully open source. Source code is open source, but also the process to set the roadmap is also open source. There's obviously teams that are working on Akash full time, and these teams have funding directly from the protocol, right? So by using a token, the second order effects, primary purpose is to secure the network,
right.
But the second order effects is add sustainability to open source software. So I think that's something that's starting to get popular now, and people are starting to realize, like, hey, this crypto thing is not weird, NFTs and DeFi, but there is this thing called open source, and there's this thing called DePIN, or decentralized physical infrastructure networks, Akash being a category creator for DePIN, that adds sustainability to open source software, right? So, and I think tokenized open source software is going to be a third leg of open source business models. So far we are able to see Red Hat, which mastered the support model. Red Hat was the only company that could do that. In fact, there's no other company that could replicate that successfully. And then you have the open core model, which is Databricks being a popular one, where you have your core software as open source, but your enterprise capabilities or the other premium software as closed source, right? And that's, depending on who you talk to, the argument is not pure open source, and there's this commercial aspect. But Akash is pure open source. There's no commercial aspect for Akash, right?
Wow.
And that tells volumes, and I think the tokenized open source software will be a third leg in open source business models, and Akash is pioneering.
So one of the traditional issues that people have had with cloud, old school cloud, is around security. So when you talk to people that were not as familiar with this model, sort of Web3, like a little bit different than traditional, like Amazon or IBM or Microsoft, whatever that is, how do you broach that subject with them?
It's a good question. So security, I remember. I was one of the before Kubernetes, before Akash, I was working in enterprise, right? So I was working in Kubernetes, at Kaiser Permanente. I was one of the few people that was migrating from the traditional data centers to cloud. And a big challenge was, like, is cloud secure, right? Now people take that as a norm, but back then, if you think about it, you just didn't know what was running underneath the hood. And that's a very viable issue. So the way Akash solves it is using auditors, a decentralized network of auditors. So Akash, the best analogy for Akash is Airbnb for data centers.
Okay.
So just like how you would, go to Hilton if you want consistency, but if you want variety, you go to Airbnb. So Akash, you have about 80 providers now, all different sizes and shapes. You have Equinix of the world to mom and pop, like Joe's data centers of the world, right? With various degrees of compliance and security capabilities, right? And the way you know someone is telling the truth is through auditing. So there is a decentralized network of auditors that go and audit each property of a data center. Right. Say, for example, if a data center claims that they have a SOC compliance. So these auditors go in and verify this compliance offline and post the proof online, whereas you as a user can trust the proof, thereby trusting the provider, right? So in fact, Akash gives you more trust than traditional Amazons, because Amazon will not show you the certificates, right? Because they're too big, right?
Yeah.
Here, anybody, you can spend $1 on a provider, you can get the proof that their compliance is actually compliance and whatnot. So that's how we solve. We solve basically minimize trust required by maximizing visibility into the provider.
Makes total sense. No, I get that as it's sort of native to this industry. So one of the things that always jumps out to me was that there's been organizations like this for a while, that if I had my phone and I wanted to use the processing, like lend out the processing power or the space in my computer, whatever the case is, I would get paid out on tokenization of that. But that's sort of like a model for everyone who wants to get involved in it. Is this targeted at a specific audience, like more enterprise, or is it all over the place?
So most of our users are enterprise, and most of the compute is data center grade compute.
Okay.
Like we have tier 4 to tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 data centers. In fact, biggest demand driver right now is all GPUs, right? Because GPUs are very hard to come by. In fact, there was a story by Semaphore that was posted about 6-7 months ago that talked about how AI's biggest savior is blockchain. They talked about Akash.
Yeah.
They interviewed a Columbia student who was finding it impossible to get GPUs to do some training, and he could come to Akash and find them at a reasonable price. I mean, stories like that are really highly impactful, right? Because, and if you're a startup company today, if you raise a bunch of money, if you need to get GPUs, you need to get to one of these CoreWeaves and Lambda Labs and get into long contracts with $1 million minimums and wait for 3 months by the time you can see the first ship, right?
Yeah.
So a startup's time is your biggest, resource, and if you lose time, you're not going to be able to make the progress that you want to. Versus come to Akash and you can find out on demand, right?
There you go.
And Akash providers, as they see more demand, more supply comes online. So it goes hand in hand. So Akash is able to attract enterprise-grade compute, and that's how it's more sustainable, whereas the rest of the networks were mostly optimized for home computers. With home computers, the challenge is the networking and reliability, right?
Yes.
And trust, right? So those networks didn't really take off because majority of that untrustworthy, low-quality compute, whereas Akash H100s for $59 is, well,
that's
it sells
great.
by itself. So.
All right, I have one more question, and I'd love to turn it over to you, see if there's anything else you wanted to talk about. But this one's a little bit different, so pivoting in a totally different direction. So with like Gen AI, the production of both video as well as like pictures itself, we're seeing a lot more deep fakes, things of that nature. How do you see blockchain potentially saving some of the materials that are being made right now? I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, so provenance is a big property for blockchain. If anything, right, I think this is such a use case we've talked about quite a lot with, hey, AI, blockchain saving fake information, right? So obviously, I mean, blockchain being immutable nature gives us incredible properties to track origin of a piece of content, right? But the challenge is adoption, right? So you need device level adoption.
Yeah.
So for example, the video that you're producing, how do I know this video is authentic or not? Well, if the device that captures this video, signs the authenticity into the file, and that authenticity standard is propagated across to the consumer, right? Be it print media.
Yeah.
So the challenge is, well, how do you do that, right? In fact, blockchains are phenomenal to do that, right? So you can say, and there's also a new standard, I can't think off the top of my head what the standard was called, but there were these standards actually implemented by, I think, Sony, I believe. Okay, yeah. Not using a blockchain, but some degree of authenticity, right? So I think that, and there are a few protocols that I've come across, can't think top of my head, but they were doing a very interesting mechanisms where they would have a browser plugin installed, so anything you see online can be verified back, the authenticity and whatnot. And obviously, Gen AI created on blockchain can easily track from inference and whatnot, right? So technology exists. I think adoption is a challenge, right?
No, totally.
Technology is not that difficult to create, at least with the current tools that we have.
No, great thoughts. No, I appreciate that. All right, anything last that you want to mention?
I mean, I think folks. I think Akash, the big challenge with Akash right now is people are afraid that it's crypto and whatnot, right? So people don't try to go the extra mile to go do the extra work, but I highly recommend folks go to akash.network/GPUs, and proof is in the pudding. And I think AI and on blockchain is a reality now, and blockchains are definitely saving AI.
That's so true. Excellent. All right, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. All right, wonderful. Thanks. Yeah.